Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into the real engine room of product analytics, the stuff that happens long before a pretty graph ever shows up on a screen.
That's right.
We are taking a really close look at the structure behind it all, event taxonomy and instrumentation. If you've ever found yourself staring at a dashboard and just thinking, can I actually trust this number? Well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone's been there. Product analytics, when it's done right, it's this incredibly clear story of how people are actually using your software. But that story needs a language. It needs a grammar.
A universal language, right?
Exactly. The event taxonomy isn't just like a list of names you make up. It's the map. And it's the standard that makes sure everyone from the brand new engineer all the way up to the CEO is reading that map the exact same way. We've gone through a whole bunch of PM study notes, governance docs, basically the blueprints that top companies use to build their data foundations.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to give you that essential framework, kind of a shortcut to getting this structure right. The goal is to move you away from just, building a data system that creates a ton of noise.
Yeah, just noise.
And get you toward one that actually delivers clean, reliable, high-signal insights. It's really the difference between tracking everything that moves and meticulously tracking the few things that truly matter to your business.
And we're going to learn how to do that by tracking specific user actions that directly answer your most important business questions. The source material here is, I will say, pretty dense. It covers everything from, basic definitions and naming conventions all the way to retention analysis. We'll even touch on some concepts from things like the mixed panel guides, and maybe most importantly, the common pitfalls that cause these data systems to just decay over time.
So by the end of this, you should feel, I hope, really equipped to master the language of analytics governance. You'll know what to track, sure, but more importantly, you'll get the strategic why behind all these, sometimes strict-sounding rules about naming and structure. It's all about making sure you can actually measure growth and trust your data in the long run.
Let's do it.
All right, let's unpack this blueprint, starting at, the very beginning. Okay, let's start at square one. The term event taxonomy, it sounds, a little academic, like something you'd see scribbled on a data scientist's whiteboard. What is it, really, in practice?
Yeah, it does sound a bit formal, but at its core, an event taxonomy is it's the structured system you use to name, organize, and manage every single event you track. And an event is just a user action, basically.
So it's rule book.
It's often called a rule book, but honestly, I think that's too soft. It's more like the immutable API specification for your analytics data.
Whoa, okay, an API spec. That's a strong way to put it.
It is, but I think it's the right way. It dictates the syntax, the semantics, the quality control for every single piece of behavioral data your app sends out. Without that rigid structure, your data is just. It's fundamentally unreliable because its meaning is totally subjective.
And that's a really important distinction, right? Moving it from just a list of suggestions to an actual API spec. It implies a contract that you just can't break.
Precisely. Think about it. Imagine you have a big product, maybe 100 features, 20 different engineers are instrumenting tracking, 15 different PMs are defining what they want to see.
It's already getting messy.
It's a recipe for chaos. If they all decide on their own name for something as simple as a user starting a free trial, you're going to end up with trial started, start trial, user began subscription, and my personal favorite, trial activation.
Right. And they all mean the same thing, but to the database, they're completely different.
There are 4 distinct things. So data ingestion becomes a mess, and trying to add up those numbers to get a single, simple KPI is, it's impossible without someone manually cleaning up that data constantly. A strong taxonomy imposes that necessary discipline. It forces consistency from the moment the event is created to the second it hits the dashboard.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So let's talk about the why. Why go through all this trouble? What's the real power of having a strong taxonomy?
The benefits, they really fall into 3 big buckets: clarity, trustworthiness, and scalability.
Okay, let's take clarity first.
So clarity. A strong taxonomy ensures that communication is totally unambiguous, across both technical and non-technical teams. When the CEO asks about the trial started numbers, the engineer and the product analyst are looking at the exact same uniquely defined data point. There's no debate.
which probably cuts down on a lot of useless meetings.
Oh, countless hours. Hours of meetings where people are just arguing over what the data means, not what the strategy should be. It shifts the entire conversation.
Okay, so that leads right into the second pillar, which you said was data trustworthiness.
Yes. And trustworthiness it's just non-negotiable. It's the prerequisite for any successful data analysis. If you trust the name of the event, you can trust the number that's attached to it.
And that confidence speeds everything up.
It leads directly to faster insights, much more accurate reporting, and it's absolutely critical for complex things like, say, cohort retention analysis. I mean, if your data is fragmented or redundant, your retention analysis is completely worthless. Your cohorts aren't apples to apples anymore.
And the third benefit was scalability. That sounds like it's more about the efficiency of the whole organization.
It absolutely is. A solid taxonomy, it just reduces data redundancy and, by extension, it reduces data noise. It cleans up your database. It prevents all those duplicate or unused events from just piling up over the years.
The ghost data.
The ghost data, exactly. And what's more, it makes onboarding new people, new analysts, new PMs, new engineers so much easier. A new team member doesn't have to spend a week trying to learn 1,000 inconsistent, unique event names. They just learn the system. They learn the schema, the naming rules, the required properties, and that system is consistent across the entire product. If your product is growing fast, this is really the only way your analytics infrastructure can possibly keep pace.
So let's flip that coin. Let's look at the real cost of getting this wrong. What happens when teams just let tracking become a free-for-all?
The cost is systemic failure. It really is. And it usually starts with the most visible symptom, conflicting reports. This is probably the most damaging outcome.
I think I've lived this.
We all have. Imagine the growth team pulls a dashboard and it shows, say, 1,000 successful new activations this month. But then the finance team, pulling transaction data from a slightly different system, or maybe using a slightly different event, name like subscription payment received instead of activation complete, they report only 850.
And leadership sees both numbers.
And when leadership sees those two conflicting truths, they don't trust either of them. So decisions either slow to a crawl, or even worse, they're made based on gut feeling, completely bypassing the data system you've invested millions in.
That kind of situation just poisons the well. Makes everyone distrust the data.
It does. And beyond the trust issue, poor structure just creates a mountain of technical debt. You see all these duplicate, unused events, the ghost data we talked about, just sitting there. And engineers, they become afraid to deprecate anything because they have no idea who might be using it for some report somewhere.
But the database just fills up with clutter.
It fills with clutter, which eventually causes dashboards to break, alerts to fail, and the entire system just starts to decay because no one feels like they own the events they didn't name. The outcome is just slowed, paralyzed decision-making. It's all driven by this deep distrust in the data. If the study notes we looked at emphasize anything, it's avoiding this because it's probably the single most common reason data initiatives fail, no matter what tool they're using.
Okay, so to build this trustworthy system, we need to really understand the fundamental components. Our source material lays out 4 distinct concepts, 4 types of data. And it seems like if we confuse these basic atoms, our analysis downstream is just broken from the start.
They are the pillars. Yeah, let's draw a really clean line between each one. It's crucial.
All right, concept number 1, events. This is the action itself, right?
Yep. An event is the most fundamental unit. It's a time-stamped record of something a user did or even something the system did that we want to measure. It's the core interaction. And the notes really stress the need for specificity here. Examples are things like sign-up started, purchase completed, or file uploaded. We're logging that interaction, that specific moment in time when something important happened.
But like we said, an event by itself just tells you that something happened. It doesn't give you much to work with. To get any real analytical power, we need concept number 2. Event properties. This is where we start adding the context.
Exactly. Event properties are the metadata of the action. They are the descriptive bits that tell you how that specific instance of the event occurred. And they're what we call ephemeral. They only exist in the context of that one event they're attached to. They are the modifiers that make all your filtering and segmentation possible.
So if the event is, say, video watched,
the properties would tell you which video it was, how long they watched it for, maybe what quality the stream was in, all the details about that specific viewing.
Can you give us a few more concrete examples of those modifiers?
Sure. The source material lists things like subscription plan, File size 'em, payment method, or even think date text. That last one is a great example. If you're analyzing a funnel and you want to know if users who saw a button that said try 14 days free converted better than the ones who saw start now,
You'd need to filter by that property.
you'd have to filter the trial started event by the think date text property. Without properties like that, your event count is just a big, useless lump sum. But with them, it becomes incredibly precise and lets you do powerful comparative analysis.
Okay, so that's the key distinction. Event properties describe the instance of the action. Now, let's move to concept number 3, user properties. How do these differ?
The key word here is persistence. User properties, sometimes they're called user attributes, are details about the individual user that they persist across different sessions and multiple events. They describe the user's state, their demographics or their current status. They're tied to the user ID, not to a specific action they're doing right now.
So an event property like price paid might be different every time a purchase completed event fires. But a user property like the user's country or their current plan type, that only changes when that specific attribute of the user is explicitly updated.
Exactly right. They're about the population, not the behavior itself. Good examples are country, plan type, or accountage days. You use these to segment your entire user base before you even start your analysis. You might want to look at all users on the Pro plan, that's a user property, and then see how often they perform the file uploaded event.
And it seems way more efficient, right? If you track clan type as a user property, it only needs to be updated once when the user upgrades or downgrades. You don't have to attach it to every single click they make.
That efficiency is critical, both for data integrity and, honestly, for cost control. It avoids a massive amount of redundant data, but, and this is a big but, for B2B SaaS companies, focusing only on the individual user is a huge mistake. And that brings us to concept 4, group properties.
Yes, this is such a critical point for anyone listening who works in enterprise or, team-based software. Group properties are the metadata about the organization or the team or the workspace.
It is non-negotiable for B2B. I mean, when you're analyzing an enterprise product, individual users come and go, they're transient, but the account, the organization, that's where the revenue lives, that's where churn decisions happen. Group properties define that organizational unit that pays the bill.
So what are some examples?
Things like company size, billing cycle, industry, or even stuff like total cents purchased or account manager name.
It sounds like this is the absolute foundation for doing any kind of account health scoring.
It is the only foundation for it. If you want to calculate account churn or expansion revenue, or even see if a big feature rollout was successful for a whole company, you have to analyze the data at the organization level, not the individual user level.
Right.
If Acme Core has 50 users and 45 of them suddenly stop logging in, group properties are what let you flag Acme Core as at risk for churn. If you only track user properties, you'd just see 45 individuals logging out. You could easily miss the bigger systemic organizational failure that's happening. This distinction between the individual and the organization is, I think, the defining factor in successful B2B analytics.
Okay, so let's synthesize that. We have the building blocks. Events are the action. Event properties describe that specific instance of the action. User properties describe the individual person. And group properties describe the company or team that person belongs to. It's like a nested structure of context from the micro moment all the way up to the macro organization.
You've got it. That's the framework. Okay, so we have the ingredients. Now we need the architectural blueprint. And that brings us to section 3, which is, let's be honest, often the most contentious and frustrating part of all this. The rules of naming.
This is where the discipline really comes in to prevent that chaos we were talking about.
It is. High-quality data depends completely on rigid, consistent adherence to these naming rules. And let's start with the first, and I think the most critical rule for naming events, the past tense rule. The source material is very clear on this. Always use past tense to indicate a completed action.
Okay, I get the goal. You want to confirm success. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. Why is project created so much better than create project? I mean, can't an engineer just make sure that the create project event only fires after the server says it's okay? It feels like we're just adding, a picky grammar rule.
That's a great challenge, and it's a common one. The answer really gets into both the psychology of how people read data and the technical reality of building funnels. If you use a present tense name like create project, the name itself implies a request. It implies an attempt.
An intent.
An intent, exactly. If I'm a PM and I'm looking at a dashboard, I don't want to know about intentions. I want to know about successful outcomes. By forcing the past tense project created, you eliminate all of that ambiguity right at the linguistic level. You are guaranteeing that the event being logged represents a successful, completed state.
I see where you're going. If an engineer logs create project, the instant the user clicks the button on the front end,
Yeah.
but then the API request fails because of some network error.
Your funnel is now polluted with a phantom success.
Right. It's a lie.
It's a lie. Your funnel shows that the user completed that step when in reality they failed or they gave up or they hit a bug. This dramatically inflates the perceived success rate of that step, and worse, it hides a critical point of friction in your product. By mandating project created, you force the engineering team to instrument that event only after the server sends back a successful confirmation, usually from a webhook or a confirmed API response. It guarantees data integrity.
And if you did want to track the failures,
You'd name them explicitly. Project creation attempted or project creation failed. You don't lump attempts and successes together under one ambiguous name. That rigor saves weeks of debugging down the line, I promise.
okay, so that clarity isn't just aesthetic, it's a hard requirement for accurate funnel analysis. So past tense confirms a successful outcome. What about the casing? Our notes mentioned two different standards here.
Right. Consistency in casing helps us both visually and programmatically tell the difference between an event name and a property name. The rule is, event names should use title case, like message sent or profile viewed.
Why title case?
It just makes them highly readable and distinct. On dashboards, in chart titles, in reports, they look like proper nouns, which they kind of are. They're the official names of key moments.
Then properties use a different convention? What's the thinking there?
Properties should use snake case. For example, screen name or transaction value. The reason for using snake case for properties is sort of twofold. First, it's a very common convention in a lot of data query languages like SQL and in programming environments like Python with pandas. So using snake case just makes life easier for analysts and data engineers.
It fits their workflow.
It fits their workflow. And second, it instantly differentiates the property from the title-cased event name. It just prevents any visual confusion when you're writing a complex query that involves filtering. We're trying to design the system to be both machine-readable and human-intelligible at the same time.
Okay, so beyond the technical rules for casing, there's the bigger need to just avoid vague names in general. The notes say to reject names like click button or using internal engineering jargon. That seems obvious, but I bet it happens all the time.
It's probably the second most common failure point after using the wrong tense. Clicked button tells you nothing actionable. Was the user trying to upgrade, to share something? To delete their account, you need specificity. Payment method selected is infinitely better than option chosen.
And the jargon.
The jargon is a killer for collaboration. If you name an event widget API response 200, only the back-end engineering team knows what that actually means. The taxonomy has to be accessible to everyone, the PM, the analyst, the marketing team. Everyone needs to speak the same analytic language. The taxonomy is a public contract, not a private engineering log.
So let's look at the recommended schemas that give us a simple blueprint for this.
The source material gives a really effective structure for event names, which is object action. This structure basically forces you to be descriptive and to use the past tense.
So instead of a generic action, you first identify the specific thing being acted upon.
Precisely. Profile viewed, message sent, trial started. The object is clear, the action is past tense. It's simple, predictable, and it scales. And for property names, again, just keep it descriptive and use snake case. Screen name, ICE experiment variant, transaction value.
Let's go a bit deeper on the event schema example, because this is really where the theory becomes practical governance. It's not enough to just name the event subscription purchased. We need this whole blueprint to guarantee quality control before an engineer even starts coding.
This blueprint is the essential documentation layer. It's the contract. For our example, subscription purchase, the first field you absolutely must have is the description.
What did that look like?
It should be a clear, plain language sentence. For instance, fired when a user successfully completes a paid subscription purchase. That one sentence immediately eliminates any confusion with, say, trial signups or failed payments.
And the owner field, which is listed as the growth PM in this example, that seems critical for governance.
It's maybe the most critical part for long-term health. Assigning an owner is the first step in preventing tracking decay. That PM is now responsible for maintaining this definition, for ensuring the properties are still relevant, and for officially deprecating the event if the feature is ever removed. No owner means that event is guaranteed to become ghost data.
Next up in the schema is the properties section. Detail seems key here.
The required metadata has to be listed out. For this purchase event, it's plan type, billing cycle, price leased, coupon used, and payment method. And I want to pause on a property like coupon used.
Why that one?
Because if that property is missing, the finance team can never, ever accurately reconcile the revenue data from your analytics with the revenue in their payment system. They can't account for discounts. A missing property like that causes immediate fundamental distrust between the finance and growth teams. Every single required property has to be there for a solid business reason.
Okay, and then we get to triggers, which tells the engineer where in the code this thing is supposed to live.
Exactly. The trigger defines the precise technical moment. For subscription purchased, it's defined as immediately after payment success webhook. This tells the engineer that this tracking code must be on the secure backend. It's a server-side event. We're logging the consequence, not the user's initial click. This prevents any front-end manipulation or errors.
And finally, exclusions. This is about clarifying the edge cases before they turn into analysis errors. The example here is not fired for trial signups.
This might seem overly meticulous, but it's so necessary. If a trial signup also involves, say, putting a credit card on file, an engineer might be tempted to track it as a purchase event. The exclusion explicitly forbids this, preserving the integrity of your true revenue metric. This whole blueprint, with the definition, owner, properties, triggers, and exclusions, that's the minimum quality standard before tracking gets approved and deployed. It's the PM's job to fill this out, and the engineer's job to implement it exactly as written.
So we've designed the perfect rulebook. We have our schema. Now we get to the implementation phase, instrumentation. This is actually putting the tracking code into the application. And the big challenge here seems to be applying what the notes call the necessity filter, knowing what to track out of the thousands of possible user actions.
Oh, yeah. The temptation to track everything is very, very strong, especially for younger teams. But the reality is, tracking everything just gives you noisy data that's impossible to maintain and, frankly, often way too expensive to store and query.
So what does the filter look like?
The necessity filter just ensures every single event you track serves a clear strategic purpose. You only track events that directly support your key metrics, things like activation, retention, conversion, or events that help you validate a specific product hypothesis or measure a feature goal.
So it has to tie back to a North Star metric or an OKR.
Exactly. Or it needs to be essential for funnel and path analysis, or, critically, for retention analysis. Everything else is just noise.
So if an event doesn't directly map to a business question or a KPI, it should just be rejected during that schema review process we just talked about.
Absolutely. Every tracking point has to have a strategic why. If you're thinking about tracking a small button click on a settings page that has no known impact on retention or feature adoption, that event is noise. Reject it. We have to be really focused on tracking that enables high-value analysis, especially retention, which requires those super clean definitions of a core event and a return event.
And where do we focus our efforts? It's not just about scattering these events all over the product.
No, tracking has to be placed strategically along the highest value paths. Our sources highlight a few key zones. First, the critical user journeys, like the path from sign-up to activation. Second, entry and exit points, so you can diagnose where users are coming from and where they're dropping off.
And for new features, I assume.
Definitely. New feature surfaces to measure adoption. Also, high-value or high-friction steps in a flow, so you can find the bottlenecks. And fundamentally, you have to track all revenue touch points. You track the key milestones and decision points, not the scenery in between.
Let's talk about governance, because this feels like the mechanism that prevents this perfect system from just falling apart in 6 months. The notes really stress that explicit ownership is the key. What does that division of labor look like in a healthy team?
It's basically a separation of powers model. It's designed to create accountability and, checks and balances.
So first, the product manager, the PM, owns the event naming and the definition.
Correct. The PM is the domain expert. They're the ones who know the analytical need. They define the whole schema, the name, the properties, the triggers, the exclusions. They are the gatekeepers. And the process should be that no engineering ticket for instrumentation can even be created until that data definition document is finalized and signed off on.
Then engineering owns the event instrumentation itself.
Right. They take the PM's definition and they translate it into code. They make sure it fires correctly at the right trigger point, whether that's front end, back end, mobile, whatever, and that all the required properties are there and have the right data type.
And then the data or product analytics team, they own the validation.
Yes, they are the QA department for the data stream. They use tools to monitor the live events and make sure that the event is firing at the right volume, with the correct properties, and without any duplicates or errors. They're the quality auditors. And their approval should be the absolute final step before an event is considered live and ready for reporting.
And then the maintenance is a shared, ongoing thing.
Exactly. Maintenance is a continuous loop between the PM and the data team. Whenever a feature changes, or if the data team flags an event because its volume has dropped to zero, the owner, the PM, is responsible for either updating the schema or officially deprecating the event.
Yeah.
This is what prevents that silent decay. This whole structure ensures that no single team can approve, implement, and validate an event all by themselves.
Okay, let's pivot to the whole reason we're doing most of this. Retention-focused tracking. The notes pull out some specific concepts, emphasizing 3 necessities for doing any kind of cohort analysis.
These 3 necessities basically define the boundaries for your analysis. You absolutely need a clear activation event, a clear return event, and consistent measurement periods. D1, D7, W1, and so on.
Let's pause on that for a second for any listeners who might be less familiar with that cohort language. What exactly are D1, D7, and W1?
Right, good call. These are just standardized time buckets used across the industry to make sure you're comparing cohorts accurately. D1 means day 1 retention. It's the percentage of users who came back and did your return event on the day immediately after their first day.
And D7 and W1.
D7 is day 7 retention, measuring their return a week later. And W1 is week 1 retention, which is a slightly different calculation. By using these standard timeframes, you make sure that when you compare the group of users that signed up in January to the group that signed up in June, you're actually measuring performance apples to apples. It accounts for things like seasonality or product changes. You can't analyze retention without these clear periods.
And the most critical piece of that entire analysis is defining the core event, that moment that truly represents product value.
This is the aha moment, but translated into a measurable data point. It's the one action that confirms the user got the core utility they came to your product for, and it is not logging in. It's doing the thing. If you track the wrong core event, your retention numbers will lie to you about how sticky your product really is.
The examples provided in the source material are really good here. They illustrate this principle perfectly. For Spotify, the core event is song played.
It's the ultimate value. You get Spotify to listen to music. If you only tracked app opened, you might see high retention numbers, but those users could just be opening the app, looking at some album art, and leaving. If they're not playing a song, they are not getting value, and they are going to churn. Song played is the hard evidence of that value exchange.
And for Duolingo, the language learning app, it's lesson completed.
Again, the value proposition is learning a language. That only happens when the user actually invests the effort to complete a lesson. If you just tracked app opened, a user might spend 5 minutes just browsing the different language courses and then close the app. That is not retention. That's window shopping. Lesson completed proves they engaged with the core utility.
And for a tool like Figma, the collaborative design tool, it's file edited.
Yes. The whole point of a design tool is creating and editing. Users might view a file someone shared with them or just look at their dashboard, but if they aren't actually generating or manipulating content file edited, they aren't leveraging the product's power. They aren't engaged in a sticky behavior. Defining this one core event is probably the single most strategic decision you will make in your retention tracking setup.
The return event, then, can just be the same as the core event, or I guess it could be another high-value action depending on how the product is used.
Yes, the return event just confirms the user came back to get more of that core value. But we also need to track not just that they returned, but what drives that return. And this is where retention drivers come in. We have to track properties related to things like usage depth, collaboration, habit loops, and those critical first-week success patterns.
So how does tracking a specific driver property, like, say, shared file count, actually influence product strategy?
This is where the analysis becomes incredibly actionable. Let's take that example. If we track shared file count as a property on our file edited core event, and our analysis shows that users who share 3 or more files in their first 7 days are, say, 3 times more likely to still be active at D30.
You've found a magic number, a habit loop.
You found a major habit loop.
Yeah.
So the product team can immediately shift their onboarding and their activation strategy to do everything possible to get a new user to share 3 files in that first week. The data is telling us how to build a stickier product. These drivers are what move your data from just, observation to actual prescriptive guidance for growth.
We've covered the framework, the building blocks, the strategy. Now let's wrap up by looking at the unavoidable dangers, the 8 common traps that even really well-intentioned teams can fall into. Knowing these pitfalls is like essential preventative maintenance.
Yeah, these are the common failure modes of data governance. Number one is that temptation we talked about, tracking too many events, which just results in noise. This is the data hoarder mentality.
Where people just think that more data is always better.
Right, and it just creates this huge analytic overhead. If you're tracking every single scroll and every mouse hover, you generate a massive volume of data that becomes incredibly difficult to query and super expensive to store. The important signal actions get drowned out by all the noise, which makes spotting critical behavioral shifts almost impossible.
Okay, number 2, vague event names. We've hit on this a lot, but it's worth repeating. If the name is unclear, the data is useless.
Number 3, missing properties. This one is a quiet killer. If you forget to add a critical property for segmentation like currency on a purchase event or experiment variant on a core action, you can never go back in time and analyze your data against that dimension. The data is just fundamentally broken from that perspective, and you have to wait for the next deployment to even start collecting it, losing weeks or months of history.
Pitfall number 4, poor QA and validation of the instrumentation.
The schema might look perfect in the document, but if the code itself is faulty, the event fires twice, or it fires on a server error instead of a success, your analysis is totally compromised. I guarantee every analyst listening has felt that horror of pulling a report only to realize their daily active user count has been inflated by 10% for the last 2 months because some key event was double firing.
Go there. Okay, pitfall 5, tracking front-end only and missing those crucial server-side events.
Yes. Any high-value, irreversible, or security-sensitive action-like revenue events, account creation, critical data deletions, those must be tracked server-side. Front-end events can be easily missed if a user's internet connection drops, or if they just close the tab too quickly. If your main revenue metric relies on a front-end button click, you are risking massive financial reconciliation errors.
Trap number 6 is an insidious one, and you often don't see it until it's too late. No versioning strategy, which breaks all of your historical analysis.
This is an analyst's nightmare. A PM decides that message sent should now be called communication established. If the old event is just turned off and the new one starts, your historical time series graph for that metric instantly drops to 0 and a new line begins. You have completely invalidated any ability to compare to past performance. Quarter over quarter, year over year reporting. It's all meaningless.
Pitfall 7 goes back to governance. No event owners assigned, which leads to decay.
For sure. If the engineer who implemented the event leaves the company and then the feature changes a year later, who knows if that event is still valid? Without a named owner, nobody is accountable for checking. The event just silently breaks, and you only realize it when a critical dashboard suddenly goes flat.
And finally, the 8th trap, set and forget tracking. That just degrades over time.
Products evolve. What was true about a feature 6 months ago might not be true today. If the tracking isn't proactively maintained and audited, it will inevitably become obsolete and start logging bad data. Governance has to be a perpetual, continuous cycle, not a one-time project.
To wrap up the practical side of this, the source material gives us a great summary checklist. This is like the final quality control gate that every PM or analyst should run through before they approve a new event for implementation.
Yeah, applying this checklist basically ensures that you've thought about how to mitigate all 8 of those traps we just covered. This is the blueprint for approval.
Okay, first question on the checklist. Is the event name clear, concise, and in the past tense? That's checking the past tense rule and the basic clarity standard.
Second, does it map directly to a product KPI or an OKR? This ensures strategic necessity. It prevents noise. If you can't link it to a business objective, you should probably reject it.
Third, are all required properties included? This prevents that segmentation failure we talked about, especially for critical things like revenue or experiment properties.
Fourth, is the event described unambiguously in the definition? Is there absolute crystal clear agreement on the firing logic across all the teams?
Fifth, are the edge cases clarified, with exclusions and triggers? This defines the boundaries of the event and guarantees it only fires when it's supposed to.
Sixth, is ownership assigned? This creates accountability and prevents that long-term decay.
And finally, number 7, are the validation steps defined? This is the QA gate, a clear process to prove the event is firing correctly in the live environment before anyone uses it to make a decision.
If you can confidently answer yes to all 7 of those questions, then you have a high-quality, trustworthy data point that's ready for an engineer to implement. This systematic approach is really the difference between a successful data system and just a big, expensive, unusable pile of numbers.
That was a tremendous deep dive into really the architecture of product analytics. We've established that taxonomy is this essential structured language for user behavior. We've explored the critical distinctions between events, event properties, user properties, and group properties, which is
Yeah.
just non-negotiable for B2B SaaS. And we've really driven home the necessity of rigorous naming conventions, especially that past tense rule, as a foundation for building trust in your data.
And we learned that all of this instrumentation has to be strategic, with a laser focus on defining that core event, the moment of value, as the true north for measuring long-term retention. By putting these governance structures in place, you move your organization away from just guessing and constantly debugging your data and towards having a systematic, clean narrative of how people are actually engaging.
It really does transform that raw data from just a disorganized pile of transactions into a clear, reliable story of what your users are doing and why they're succeeding or maybe failing in your product. This framework, if you apply it diligently, is probably the most powerful tool you have for anticipating and driving product success.
And, building on that point from the source material about tracking decay, we know that if tracking has to be maintained to avoid becoming obsolete, the governance process can't just be about approving new stuff. It has to include proactive health checks.
Right.
So here's a thought for you to mull over. If the current focus is always on approving new events with that checklist, what specific process or metric, or maybe even a tool, could you design to proactively audit all of your existing events for obsolescence, rather than just waiting for a critical dashboard to break? How do you maintain the health of the 90% of tracking you already have out there?
That's a tough question. It demands a governance solution that looks backward just as much as it looks forward. Something to think about as you review your own data system this week.
We really hope these insights help you build a much stronger, much cleaner data foundation.
Until next time.